Today, I am going to be talking about the book Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism by Chogyam Trungpa. The chapter today is titled Self-Deception. This kind of continues from what the previous chapter was talking about. And so ego is always trying to attain spirituality. And as a result of this, then self-deception is always a problem. We can want something wonderful from our spiritual friend, especially in the beginning. Trungpa Rinpoche describes this as hunting the guru. And this has really nothing to do with real opening or surrendering. It is just totally different and really blocks you from progressing on the spiritual path. There's another incorrect approach that he mentions here, and that is to see the guru as transplanting something through his ability, the power of the teachings, or whatever, into you. And this is dualistic thinking. It is seeing the teachings as something foreign to us, when in actuality, the teachings are really about our essential, absolute nature, and it could never be foreign to us. So he uses the analogy of a doctor and an organ transplant and the initiation. So we have expectations about what we think we are going to get. We ignore what is, quote, really happening in our relationship with our doctor, our illness, and what this new head really is, end quote. He was, in this case, referring to if we were going to have a head transplant, which, of course, they haven't developed yet. So we need a spiritual friend who can act like a mirror, who can help us see ourselves, help us see our self-deception. We need one who is personally concerned with the whole process, who needs to help us open up and reveal to ourselves who we really are. So a real initiation is, in his words, the meeting of the two minds, that you must accept yourself as you are instead of who you would like to be. As you are, meaning with all your defects, all your faults, and so on and so forth, rather than this front that we present to the world. So we have to give up wishful thinking and self-deception. The fundamental meaning of the meeting of the two minds is that both sides are creating a situation that is open communication. It's a two-way street, you could say. Quote, the external teacher opens himself, and because you are also open, because you are awake, there is the meeting of the two elements, which are identical, end quote. So you are open, you let go for a moment the ego games, you are present. In a way, you are almost naked because you've dropped for a moment the ego games. You've just let yourself be. The second point is that this meeting of the two elements, the two minds, and that while it's talking about two elements or two minds, they are identical. So the initiation can happen formally during an empowerment. And many of you have had empowerments in the past, for instance, a Chenrezig empowerment, a Green Tara empowerment, and so forth. And here there is, again, a point in which you allow yourself to be open and to receive the blessings. And there are two reasons or two types of empowerments, and they depend on you, the practitioner. One is taking one of these formal empowerments, or wangs, is a Tibetan word, as a blessing. The other is as a permission to do the practice of that particular deity. Now here, Trungpa Rinpoche is talking as much about having this happen informally. And it's a matter of uniting the spiritual essence of the Guru with yours. There is no dualism. You just open up and it happens. So you experience it, perhaps a flash of insight, an instant understanding of part of the teachings. So now what? What's next? Well, usually when that happens, you want to preserve the experience. You feel wonderful. You may want to write it down, he says. Preserve it. But of course, it fades. It's an experience. And so these flashes of insight, they lose their intensity over time. Because again, at this point, it's just a memory. It's just thoughts. It has no essence. So you may, because you felt so wonderful, have talked about it to other people. You've tried to, you might say, base your insight on what your experience was. Perhaps try to impress other people with how wonderful an experience was that you had. But it's gone. It's no longer present. It's in the past. And then you can't admit it to others that it's gone, that what you talked about, what had happened is no longer happening. So you've used the experience, you evaluated the experience, and now the experience is gone. So what's actually happened here is that you realize you actually have opened up. You have this experience of insight because you have opened up, but then you evaluate it. You solidify it. You try to capture it. You might say you try to put it in a box and carry it with you wherever you go. So as soon as we see it as valuable, special, or extraordinary, the experience becomes separate from us. That this kind of valuation actually comes from the fear of being separated from it, from fear of losing it. So we need to understand that what is happening is that we're just realizing, getting a glimpse of perhaps what has always been there. It has always been part of our makeup, and we've never been separated from it. So this is a very important point. A quote, "We lose faith in the experience of openness and its relationship to us," end quote. And it's at this point where self-deception enters the whole picture. We have this experience of openness, and then we play games. We retell stories to ourselves. We retell stories to others. And on and on and on, layer after layer after layer. That the self-deception is trying to create the experience over and over instead of just having it, instead of just being present. And actually, he says that if we do have it over and over again, it becomes ordinary. And our ego can't accept ordinary. So instead, ego brings up memories from long ago, lots of evaluation. He says we use them to cheer ourselves up, to inspire ourselves. But all of this is in the past, not in the present, and it's ego. He then goes on to talk about the story of Marpa and Naropa. That Marpa was a Tibetan who went to India to receive teachings, and he met Naropa there. I'm not sure which trip this was of Marpa's. He made a total of 3. But anyway, in this particular situation, Naropa built a shrine to a particular deity. He told Marpa that the deity was the embodiment of wisdom and asked, quote, which one would he prostrate to, me or the shrine, in order to experience the sudden realization of enlightenment, end quote. So Marpa, of course, said he'll prostrate to the shrine. And Naropa says that that is incorrect, that you have made the wrong choice, that the point is that divine or a wisdom body versus the human body is irrelevant. Naropa says, I created the shrine. When you see this in the shrine, your inspiration will fade. So the story ends with, as long as you regard yourself or any part of your experience as the, quote, dream come true, then you're involved in self-deception. You're involved with ego projections, with a dream world. He advises working with the facts of life instead. And working with the facts of life means being open to what actually is happening, rather than what you would like to have happen, or what you think should happen, or any other conceptual, you might say, additions to whatever is happening. That ego is the mental events. Ego is not separate from the mental events. Hope and fear, gain and loss, pleasure, pain, all of this is ego evaluation. He talks about this is self-perpetuating, self-maintaining. And he uses the word structure, indicating that it is solid. It's not open. It's not what would I say? Fluid. I think maybe that's a good word too. That real experience is the beauty, the color, the excitement of now in our daily lives. The emotions he talks about, whatever we experience, contain tremendous truth, but it is being in the now rather than being conceptual about what is happening or bringing in the past or the future. He ends this chapter by saying it depends on being a grain of sand. And what he means here, I don't remember exactly where I read this particular description of his, but he described ego as this, that we are actually like a grain of sand on a vast beach, a sand beach full of grains of sand. And that one grain, perhaps our grain, sticks up a little bit higher than the rest of the grains of sand and says, I'm different, I'm special. So this is what he's talking about, that we want to become a grain of sand. This is going back to what he was talking about with ordinary mind. We want to be ordinary. It's extraordinarily ordinary, but it's still ordinary. We're not special. So that finishes the chapter, but there's some very interesting questions here. The first one is, why does bliss occur? And he responds by saying that bliss is kind of a self-hypnosis, that we're not seeing, quote, the background of who we are, end quote. We focus only on bliss, and we're just watching ourselves. And then, of course, when you come down, there you are back to where you were before you experienced the bliss. And then as he says, and all the other ego games kick in. And finally, he mentions that you're actually just trying to protect yourself completely. And my experience as a lama is that I have seen people, when they meditate, to meditate with smiles on their face. And obviously that's what is going on. And to just kind of echo what Trungpa Rinpoche said, the problem is that the bliss doesn't last, especially when you go out into the world and you find one thing after another that brings you down, and it can even lead to irritation and anger at these things that destroy your bliss for you, because you can't hold on to it. It's an experience, it's not permanent. And it's a real problem. The next question is, how do you stop evaluating and saying, that's fantastic? And the answer is that once you see yourself doing this and you realize that you're not getting anything out of it, you start finding the way out. He uses the word painfully unmask. That's one option, is that you can painfully unmask, that you see you're not getting anything out of it. The other option is that you just keep building up and building up and building up, and striving and striving and striving until it gets too exhausting. And then you give up and you drop the whole thing. But it can take a long time of building and striving over and over and over again before you get too exhausted and give up. So I recommend to unmask, even though it might be painful. In other words, seeing yourself as you really are, with your ego games, all your warts and faults and expectations and so forth, and get to know them, make friends with them. And then they become aids because you don't take them seriously. I have said this more than once, that you make friends with them and then you realize that sometimes your friends give you bad advice. The next question is, I describe it as being very wordy, but I sum it up as, what do you do when you have all these ego games? And I'm just going to quote, drop searching for anything altogether, drop trying to discover anything, trying to prove yourself. So very simply, drop it. Let go.